Do you know some badass little boys and girls getting cold this year for Christmas? Don't waste that shit on them, give it to me. Them motherfuckers can't cook, but I can and I will. Today on Poor Choices, we are making holiday brisket. Is that a thing? It is now. We're going to be replacing traditional barbecue flavors with more savory ones. And some of you are getting smokers for Christmas, so why not bust it wide open with the brisket? I'll be showing you everything from the trim to the seasoning to even my new favorite way of making brisket, which is the foil boat method. And I'm telling you, it's gonna be hard to go back to your old ways of brisket after this. And I ain't playing, I was extra bad this year. I want all the coal. I ain't paid my taxes on time. I've been speeding through school zones. I done gave out my Netflix password to like 40 people. Now, even though I was talking about coal, I'm actually gonna be doing this on my pellet grill, but I'm gonna do my best to try to account for all the different type of smokers and grills out there, so that way you can do this. Because this is really just about methods and flavors. So whether you have an offset or a big green egg, or you're like me and have a Traeger, you should be able to do this all the way across the board. So I'm starting out here with a 15-pound full packer brisket, and the most important part of this, it's prime. So I'll admit, I've always just walked into Costco because I want to get out of there as fast as possible and not fight people. And I just grabbed the first brisket that I can afford, which is usually like a $50 one. And most of the time, it's probably been a choice brisket, which choice brisket is totally fine. It's just not as good as prime. And the difference between those is really just the fat marbling and the quality of the meat. Shout out to Mad Scientist Barbecue because he put it in the best terms. Our perception of juiciness is really just fat. So the more marbling of fat that you have throughout your brisket, the juicier it's going to be, which is what we want. We want that shit nice and tender and good, where you're just fucking licking your fingers and all that sorts of crazy stuff. So 15 pounds is like the perfect way, and trust me, it's gonna feed a lot of people. So whether you have just your family of 4, or you're inviting over 20 people, there's gonna be a lot of brisket left over. So don't feel the need to have to go get like a 20-pounder and pay $120. This one's totally fine, but do make sure that it is prime. Usually you can see it, it'll be stamped or it'll say on the actual label itself. So full packer, let's get this out and get ready to start trimming. The trims will be super easy. I'm gonna try my best to show you all how the best way to do it. I'm working with one camera today, so we'll see how awkward this gets. So only thing we need is just a nice little boning knife here. This one's not even a super expensive one. This is a Victorinox boning knife that I probably paid all of 40 bucks for. If you have a fancy one, go for it, but you don't have to break the bank for it. All right, again, we have got ourselves a 15-pounder here. Brisket's really easy to trim. You kind of trim the same way every time, but every brisket is not the same because every cow is not the same. So I'm gonna do my best to try to just talk about the techniques and things I'm looking for. So then that way, if you get a brisket that doesn't look like mine, you're still able to do it. And a lot of this is just for you beginners out there who are intimidated by the process of doing brisket. I promise you, it gets really easy. The main thing we're looking for here is aerodynamicness. I don't know if that's a real word, but that's the word I'm gonna go with, because we want all that smoke and heat to flow over this with no resistance, no weird bumps and corners and stuff like that. So what I am looking at first is just how much. So this is the top of the meat. This is the flat. And on the bottom, where the fat cap is, this is the point. I am just going to start up here because visually it's a lot easier to do. And the first thing I'm looking at is this right here, this decal of fat. This is a hard fat. And there's really no bad way of trimming a brisket, but there is sloppy ways. Leaving these hard fats in here, they're just not gonna render down. It's gonna be this gloopy gloppy mess that you don't wanna deal with. So the first thing I'm gonna do is at an angle, let me put it this way. Hopefully the camera's catching it. So at an angle, I'm just gonna go ahead and take that off. I'm not gonna dig too deep into the meat. Because again, I'm really just looking to make things aerodynamic. Also, with your trimmings, with the exception of like any type of gray areas where things have been oxidized or just they turn gray because of the steaming process that happens when it's being butchered, all my other things, pieces of meat that I cut off and fats, I'm gonna put in this bag because I can save it for things like making tallow or sausage. So don't throw away your fat. And I'm not going in any particular type of order. I'm just kind of doing things I see. So like this is just some surface fat that I'm gonna cut off. This is actually the most fat I've seen on the flat side of a brisket in a very long time. But I ain't mad at it because fat is flavor. So I'm just gonna take my knife, and I don't wanna get too deep into the meat. This might take you a couple times, and listen, if you get a little meat, it's fine. If you nick it up a little bit, it is not the end of the world. But if you want to do something, you can always like take your hand and kind of lift up the brisket, kind of expose that fat a little bit more, and get it off. And how much you want to trim off is up to you. I've seen people who just do the bare minimum trimming. And then I've seen people who just spend like a full-on hour trimming their brisket to get everything off. I imagine it's a little therapeutic or maybe a little neurotic, I don't know. So this fat right here, like, avoid the temptation of trying to dig super deep into it. Like, I'm doing enough, again, to make it aerodynamic, but I'm not about to dig in there and create crevices and stuff because that's just gonna be annoying to deal with. So let's turn it here. And like this meat right here at the end is really kind of thin, and that means it's just gonna cook way faster than the rest of this brisket. So what I'm actually gonna do is just start kind of back here where I wanna get some more of this decal off, and then I'm just gonna slice all the way down to the end. And listen, do not be afraid to lose some meat in this process. Again, it's just going to happen. But that's why we save our scraps. So while this is starting out at just a little over 15 pounds, it might only be, I don't know, it might only be 12 pounds or 11 pounds when it's done. Still a lot of meat. So like right here, like this gray meat here, we don't want it. It's not that it's inedible, it just doesn't look good. And this is meat that I'm actually not going to put into my scrap pile, just because I don't want it. So that can go off to the side. All right, at some point in the butchering process, I think steam is introduced, like a little bit of steam, and that's just what's happening. It just got hit a little bit too much, but it's not the end of the world. All right, let's actually go to the back side real quick. Because one thing you're gonna always see on brisket, let me see if I can turn it towards you all. Sometimes, like this is actually not that bad, but sometimes this creates like a little mohawk, this little thing right here. And again, we're trying to get this as flat as possible. So what I think I'm gonna do, like even like this one right here, so what I'm gonna do is start with this side, because this is just some solid fat. And some people expose their point, which is totally fine. I did that actually quite a bit, and I wanna say in my first brisket video, I probably did that. But now, actually, I leave a good amount of fat on. So here's another big thing of just fat that's just not going to render. And again, I wanna get this flat. So I'm gonna press down, see if I can get it flat. If it's not really getting flat, then what I'll do is, in this big, huge chunk of fat here, just carve out a little bit. And also, again, in the past, I have obsessed over cleaning this entire little cavity of fat out. I'm not gonna do that today. And that's just something, an opinion that I formed from cooking quite a few briskets. See, all that fat, it would take forever to cook that and render that down. So we're gonna throw it in there. And it's laying a little flatter, but honestly, this is still going to cook and burn up. So we'll just lose it. Well, I've got some unfortunate cuts here. Let me show you guys. So I guess the butchering process got a little happy here and made this little chunk. So we can try to fix that. Let's just cut, go across. And this is just point meat. It's fine if we see it, a little window right there. Now, I've actually got a lot of gray going on here. So what I can do as my entire operation slides around, I'm just going to go ahead and just bring it down, because I'm gonna end up rounding this brisket off anyways. So I don't mind losing like these sides, exposing some meat, and also just getting a general idea of how thick the fat is. Again, a lot more gray on this than I've ever actually had to deal with, so let me see if I can. I may have to make an executive decision to just make a really aggressive cut. But it's okay, I'm prepared for it. Yeah. Now right here, it's actually no gray, so this has all the gray, but this I can save, because again, good fat, good point meat. Now I'm looking at this here, like this is kind of all sticking up. So I'm just gonna take my knife, and what I really wanna do is just eliminate sharp edges and create round ones. Oh, that worked out in my favor, went all the way down. So now that I've made some more cuts, some more of this decal can come off. So what I wanna do is I wanna round these edges here. Again, we don't want sharp edges, I'm gonna round it. So I'm gonna try to do that. You may have to be aggressive with it. So I'll just do my initial cut here. Kind of come down the front and then bring it around. There we go. And sometimes what you can do if you have a really good knife is, so I see the grain is going this way. So I'm gonna do is take my knife, just try to scrape some of that fat going with the grain. I actually think this knife has seen some better days and it may be time to get a new one. One thing that can become overwhelming is once you've got it all seasoned up and you're cooking it and you got all that great, amazing bark on it, is you don't know which way the grain is going anymore. All looks like just one solid mass. So one thing you can do, and you don't have to do this like once you get experience, you'll just know how to look at it and remember how you trimmed it. But one thing you can do is just like, so my grain is running this way. One thing I could do is just take my knife and just make this the only straight edge on the entire brisket. So that way when it's cooked, everything else will be rounded except for this one little section, but I know that then I can make my slices that way. And then as I get closer to the point, I know my grain will probably change this direction. And so I do like that. So that's just a trick you can do because you will certainly get it off the grill and be like, holy crap, I don't know which way to cut. Anything that's like hanging off, like this little piece of fat right here, like just let it go. Like there's still just these edges right here that I want to try to smooth out. And then I've still got some gray on here, but they're in like pretty compromising places. Like you can see right there, maybe hopefully it's caught on camera, there's some gray. And I could come in like that. I think that's actually gonna work out. Sometimes it is a puzzle, but very rewarding when you've solved it. Again, this is just point meat. I'm fine with that showing. Like there's some gray here, which I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get that without messing up too much of everything else. So I just wanna look real quick at this fat cap. This fat cap is actually the 1/4 inch that I'm kind of looking for, so I don't need to do much to it. Sometimes if it was a little bit thicker, I would just kind of expose new fat that's underneath it. I call it new fat, it's just the whiter fat. But you don't have to do that because you could get a little too aggressive and end up exposing some of your flat, which again, not the end of the world, but you just don't want to ideally do it. I think in this little cavity right here, I'm gonna cut one more time just because it was hanging off already. I guess I didn't finish that cut. Let's see. So I just went down. Again, I'm just kind of carving it and then coming back in, meeting it at where that downward cut ended. There's a little chunk of fat back here that I just want to round off. I think there are brisket trimming competitions to see who can make the prettiest looking ones. This is not that. This is backyard barbecue. So don't get too caught. I mean, listen, it's very satisfying when you trim this thing to look like a shoe, a weird looking shoe, but it's also not really necessary. All right, I can live with this. Again, every brisket is different, but you can kind of approach them the same way each time, which is just, again, aerodynamics. You don't want anything that's going to stop or prevent heat and smoke from moving throughout your smoker. So this is kind of shape. Again, we've rounded it in the front. The back is smooth, flipping it over. We've still got a 1/4 inch fat here. We've got a little exposure going on here, but it's totally fine. The back is again smooth, and then this little mohawk here, we've gotten it to lay down a little bit better than earlier when it was just like a fin. So I think we're almost ready to season this. Let me move my cutting board because now we are going to season. So as I said, we're replacing our traditional barbecue flavors with more savory ones. There we go. And you can use a variety of different type of rubs. Again, McCormick's Montreal steak seasoning is still one of my favorites. You could just use a regular steak seasoning, or you could just go, traditional Texas style salt, pepper. Maybe throw a little garlic in there. Some Lawry's seasoning, which is like the secret ingredient in a lot of those rubs. But personally, I think Texas barbecue gets boring kind of quickly. No offense, that's just me. I've had it too many times. So what I'm gonna opt for is, of course, my guys, Cattleman's Grill. This is the tri-tip seasoning, California tri-tip seasoning. This one I did for Thanksgiving, and man, was it amazing. It has all the greatness of just like savory notes, as well as that salt and pepper in there. So highly recommend it. And oh wait, no, I'm doing things out of order. Get that off. Because we need, for this, a binder. Almost went out of order. Just a little bit of mustard as a binder. Sometimes I'll use Worcestershire sauce. Sometimes I won't use a binder at all, but I really want the seasoning to stick. So I'm just gonna go with some mustard, and this is not for flavor. It's just so it can stick. And there's plenty of things you can use as binders. Again, Worcestershire sauce is really good. Some people use olive oil. You could use a barbecue sauce or a marinade that you've made. So many options, but this mustard would be fine. And I think the mustard is going to contribute pretty well to our savoriness. So going on with the California tri-tip, and listen, this is a big piece of meat. A lot of the seasoning is not going to make it into the center of actually none of the seasoning is going to make it to the center of the meat. So that's why we got to go heavy on the surface. So do not be afraid. I mean, this is one shaker. I have another shaker on standby just because I think I'm gonna need all of it. And make sure you're getting all the sides. And even though they're called barbecue rubs, we're not rubbing, we'll press it in. And another great thing about having the mustard as the binder is just that we can see what places have been seasoned enough, i.e. we don't see that yellow anymore, and what places need a little extra love. I don't know if I said that out of order, but all right, make sure getting these sides. All right, so that is one side, and just patting it in. Gonna flip this over, hopefully without ruining everything. There we go. Binder. And we're cooking this fat side up. I know a lot of people, when they do it on the pellet grills, they do it fat side down, but because we're doing foil boat methods today, I want to start with this. Actually, I'm going to do the entire cooked fat side up because we're going to use this fat as kind of a probe to determine whether this is ready to do our foil boat wrap or not. And so I like having it up. Face down, fat up. That's the way. And if you notice in some places where like the rub just is not adhering, put a little more mustard down just to make sure it is sticking. But again, don't go light on this. It is a huge piece of meat. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm actually going to put this in the fridge. I'm not gonna start smoking this until later tonight, but I'm gonna get it into my fridge, uncovered just like this, and I'm gonna allow these seasonings just to kind of dry brine it. You can do this for, I would say, up to 24 hours. I feel like after that, you may be flirting with curing it, especially if you're using something heavy in salt. But I'm not gonna be smoking this for at least another 7 hours or so, which is totally fine. I think 6 hours is like the perfect amount of time for this to sit in the fridge uncovered. So that's where it's gonna go, and we will see you back here when it's time to go on the smoker. All right, the brisket has been in the fridge uncovered with all the seasonings for about a good, say 6 or 7 hours. And so what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna leave it on the counter for about the next 45 minutes to an hour, just to kind of let it come up to room temp. And then maybe like 30 minutes from now, I'll start up my grill, and I'm gonna do that at like 190. I'm gonna let this bad boy roll overnight. I just feel like in my experiences with brisket, it is always best to not put a super cold brisket on the grill. So I'm gonna let this come to room temp. Trust me, it'll be totally fine. No type of food safety issues. But yeah, now comes the fun part. We put it on and we go to bed. All right, pardon the ugly lighting. I didn't realize that the lights on the roof, some of them went out. So I've got the brisket on. I've got it on at 190. And because I'm doing this on the Traeger Timberline 1600, I have a cool feature here, which you can't really see right now, but it's called Super Smoke. So it just pumps extra smoke into the chamber at a lower temperature, which is exactly what we're doing. I've got this fat side up, and the one thing I want to say, know your grill. So where my grill is, the heating element is actually down here in the middle, but it's actually hotter on the sides than it is in the middle. So what I've done is I've placed my brisket where my point is closer to the edges, because it can take that heat, and my flat is in the cooler zone. So that way the flat just doesn't dry out, because the flats are already leaner than the point, and they can just tend to dry out. So I know my grill really well to do that. If you have a new grill, you may be finding out for the first time. Or if you have like an offset smoke or something like that, you definitely want your point facing towards the firebox. And that's why the aerodynamicness matters, because again, all that smoky heat is flowing over this. So again, know thy cooker. But this is going on at, what time is it? It is 9:13 at 190. I'm doing it at 190 only because I know from cooking this many times that I can wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. and the brisket will still not quite be ready to get wrapped yet, which is important to me because I get to sleep. So this is what I'm doing, overnight brisket. And again, we'll address all the other cookers and the times and stuff like that. So we're gonna close it up, and we will see you all early in the morning. Good morning. It is actually 8 a.m. So I woke up at 6 just to initially check on my brisket. Wasn't quite ready, which is fine. Getting up and then not being ready yet. I would rather wake up earlier and see that it's not done or ready for the next step, versus waking up too late and you can't do anything about it. So three things I'm looking for right now. One is color. It should look like a meteorite. And right now we've got amazing color. Our bark is forming just the way I want it to. So we've got the color. Second thing I'm gonna look for is our fat. Remember, we cooked this fat side up, and what I want is this fat to really start breaking down and rendering. So a way to tell that is if you just touch it. So I'm touching the fat right now, and it's still giving me some resistance. So that's like a soft pocket of fat right there. But other areas, it's still got some resistance to it, which lets me know that it's not quite ready. So like this is a section where my finger can kind of break through. You should feel like your finger's going through gelatin, which this is not quite there yet. And then the last thing that we'll check for, because we don't want to get married to hard numbers. I know normally people say, oh, take your brisket off at 165 and wrap it. But this one's not quite ready yet. So if I go into the thickest part of the flat, it's at 160, but all those other two things lets me know it's just not quite ready. So don't be afraid to take your brisket up to 175, even 180 before you wrap it. You got to go by look, feel, and obviously I don't want to go any lower than 160 and take it off. But I think I'm going to let this rock until probably 175, maybe almost 180. Because again, I want this fat to start breaking down. If this fat on the surface is breaking down, then I know the fat and collagen inside is starting to break down, which at 160 is when collagen starts to break down. So we're in a good place. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to crank up my temperatures to 225. One, just to speed the process up, but also it's going to rain. So I'm trying to beat the weather. So I'm going to close this up, and we will check on this again in about an hour and see if it's ready to get into our foil boat. All right, we are rocking at 177 in the thickest part of the flats. We've got our color, which is still great, meteorite looking, womp, and the fat is definitely starting to render down. You can almost start poking my finger through it, especially like right there. So now it is time for my favorite part of this process, and which may be very new to a lot of you, the foil boat. So let's get it set up. All right, I have got 2 big sheets of heavy duty tin foil here. And all we're literally going to do with the foil boat is we're just going to create a boat around our brisket. Put that in. Nothing complicated about it, but what this does allow it to do, 2 things. One, this boat is going to collect all the juices from the brisket, and it's going to allow for the flat to kind of braise. And we want that because it's going to allow it to be tender and juicy, because flats are lean and tend to dry out easier. So that's great. What it also allows it to do is this top part, our fat, which is still up, allows our fat to kind of get, for lack of a better term, crispier. So our bark gets more set. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. A lot of people are obsessed with their bark formation and all that stuff like that. I've found that this is my new favorite one. It's better than doing, say, like butcher paper, or definitely better than wrapping the entire thing in foil. So we're gonna put this back on the grill, and I'm gonna bump it up to 250 degrees, just because, again, I'm trying to beat the weather. You could leave it at 225, but I wanna not get rained on. So back on the grill, and then I'm gonna put a probe in this too. So let me get that set up, and then we'll talk about what's next. All right, foil boat is back on the grill, pretty much in the exact same spot we had it before. I am cranking up the temperature to 250, and then probably about an hour or so, I'm gonna put this probe in it, and I'm gonna set the temperature to 205. I know a lot of times they say take it off at 199 and 200, but I've just cooked enough of briskets this style to know like 205 is really like the sweet spot, at least for me, to feel good. I want this probe tender, so even though I'm setting it for 205, I am going to go by feel and not hard numbers, because that sometimes can screw you over. Believe it or not, undercooked brisket and overcooked brisket have the exact same similarities. So sometimes you just didn't cook your brisket long enough for that collagen to really break down. So in the boat, it is 250 degrees now. We're gonna close this up, and again, I'll come back up here in like an hour and put the probe in. And this will probably take like another, I don't know, 3 hours or so, give or take. I may crank the heat up one more time, again, depending on the weather. I won't go any higher than 275, but we will see. So let's close it up. Just so you can all see, I've got my ThermoWorks smoke plugged in, and it is currently in the brisket, again, in the thickest part of the flat. And we've got my wireless receiver here. So I've got it set to 205, and we shall wait until it gets there. All right, so we are sitting at 204. I know I set it for 205, but actually ever since it's hit 199, I've just been coming up here and just checking on it. And right now, we are getting no resistance, which is more important than anything else. Now, if we were cooking like a lower cut, say like a choice or even like a select, which is like the lowest of low, I would be up here checking this a lot more, because you have a lot less wiggle room. But with the prime, which has such great marbling through it, we have a lot more margin of error. Think of prime briskets as like chicken wings. Like you can do a lot more with them than say you can with a chicken breast. So I want to get this off and get it downstairs, and we will talk about the resting process. But 204 was the magic number, and now it is time to go downstairs. All right, it is the hardest part of cooking any type of big meat, especially brisket, the time to rest. This is the most crucial part of it, because as your meat is cooking, all the moisture in it is tightening up and cooking and shrinking into like this tight little ball. I'm sure that's not scientific what's happening, but just use it to illustrate to you. It's all like constricting in towards the middle. And then if you were to cut into it right now while it's super hot, you're gonna get dry pieces. And then at some point, you're gonna lose all your moisture, which you don't wanna do all that work for nothing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this rest. And there are 3 ways you can do this. The first one, tried and true, dry cooler. Whether it's an expensive ass Yeti cooler or just like a $60 one you got at Home Depot. It's insulated, that's all that really matters. So you take your brisket, you put it in there, you cover it up with a few little towels that you don't mind getting dirty, and you let it rest for a minimum of, I mean, the least I would go, it would be like 2 hours, which is why it's crucial to time your brisket to when you want to serve it. So you can put it in your cooler for 2 to 4 hours. You can go even longer if you want to. This thing is gonna stay hot, trust me. Option number 2, which I came across when I lost my cooler, is my oven, which is insulated. Just put it in there, oven off, does the exact same thing as the cooler. Still cover it with some towels. Just make sure you put a note that says "Do not turn on the oven" for those other people who live in your house. And it accomplishes the exact same thing, 2 to 4 hours. Or you can go even longer if you want to. But my favorite one to do now, which is going to maybe blow your mind if you've been cooking briskets for a long time, is I like to put it in the oven at 170 degrees or lower if you can go. 170 is my oven's lowest temperature, and not every oven can do this. Some only go down to like 190, some only going to go down to 200. I would not go above 170, 175 for this. You may not notice, but a lot of your favorite barbecue joints actually cook their briskets during the day and put them in electric warmers overnight, and then they serve them the next day. And that's part of the cooling down process. So they're sitting in there at like 150, 160 as they come down. Remember, we took this off at 204. The oven is set at 170. So technically the oven is cooler than what the brisket is. So if I give this 4 hours, it'll cool down nicely. And the added benefit is all that collagen, anything in there that hasn't broken down and rendered yet, will continue to do that. It will not dry your brisket out. I promise you that, unless you're using less quality cuts. I've done this on a choice brisket before and I didn't have that issue. I've never used a select one, but again, those quality meats that have less fat marbling have less margin of error. So if you're cooking a prime, I promise you this is not going to dry it out. If anything, it's going to make it even better. So into the oven, it's going to go. Currently it is 1:15, so I'm gonna probably slice into this around 3 or 4 o'clock. And then that's pretty much it. And I know earlier I was talking about how you can do this on all your smokers. I use the pellet grill, but listen, you can do this on anything. I did the pellet grill because I wanted to cook it overnight to have it ready for like dinner time. You can do this on a ceramic grill, AKA your Kamado Joes, your Big Green Eggs, your Kongs, I think that's another brand. Exact same thing, just a full fresh bed of coals and like 3 chunks of wood. I filled my entire hopper up with Traeger's signature blend of pellets. If you can get your hand on some post oak, you'll be closer to Texas style, but just make sure you have a good amount of fuel. Now, if you're doing this on an offset smoker, you know, your traditional stick burners, you know very well that you're gonna have to man that fire. So doing this overnight doesn't make any sense. What you could do is to start this early in the afternoon, try to finish up in the evening about like around 10 or 11. Then again, pop it in your oven at its lowest setting and have it ready for lunch the next day. It's fine to go overnight in there. It'll be totally fine. As I said, a lot of your favorite barbecue places, they're not putting all these briskets in 100 coolers. They're putting them in warmers and they're serving them the next day. So give it a try and let me know how this comes out for you. But we'll see you in 4 hours. I've started my drinking. I've still got this terrible ass cough from being sick, but I think I've got the remedy, which is more drinks.
And shortly after this, I lost my voice because my cold has been coming and going. I've been coughing a lot and my voice was just done. So I had to finish this voice over style, but I just wanted to show you all me taking the brisket out and slicing into it because, listen, I understand brisket is a very expensive cut of meat. So we often don't like to take chances on ruining something that we just paid $80 for and spent an entire day doing. So I totally get it if you're hesitant to try some of these, whether it's the type of seasoning, whether it's the foil bolt, or even if it's the resting it in the oven. This is just something new to try. I've done this about 5 or 6 times now, and I've loved the results. So again, just, try new things. But this is the brisket. No problem with moisture. It was delicious. I ended up actually using it for many things, including some tacos. So this has been Poor Choices Kitchen. Hey, we have a Patreon. $1 a month is all we ask for. It definitely helps support the channel and pay for some of these experimental recipes. And hopefully, I'm hoping next week, I'll either have my voice back or it's just going to be more voiceover. But hey, I think you like my voice. Maybe. Poor Choices Kitchen. Y'all have a good time. Oh, by the way, I had bourbon. That was my poor choice. See ya.